Good morning, everybody. This is Dwayne Barone. I'm the Executive Director of Student Athletes for Healthy Relationships. I'm here at the Cureton Midstream Gas Production Facility in Kingsburg, Colorado, and I'm here to talk about safety and team performance, which really comes down to emotional and relationship intelligence. I guess the best explanation for emotional intelligence is how well do you understand your own emotionality and how well can you relate to and understand the emotionality and needs of others.
Good.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you bringing me in. As I was saying earlier, we spent 30 years in mental health treatment and counseling, the last 20 years focusing on court-ordered counseling for folks who have been arrested for domestic violence, which sounds really hot and heavy, but ultimately it's conflicts that go bad. There's only a few things that allow for the cops to arrest somebody, and usually that's destruction of property, harm to a person, harassment, threats, etc. And outside of that, they don't care too much. Why does that matter for workplace training? Well, from what I've heard, if I'm not happy at home, I may not be happy at work. If I'm not happy at work, I may not be happy at home.
I'll let you know when it starts.
Most of the people I've worked with, in fact, probably 99.9% of the people I've worked with, did not have happy homes growing up, didn't come from great situations, had something that hurt traumatically, and it kind of set them off in their adolescence, right? And eventually what happens is we grow up, we try to go become adults, we go to work, and we don't understand what our baggage is, right? And we think that is something that we can just walk away with because we turned 18 and left home. But ultimately what happens is it's tied around your ankles with steel cables. Our baggage will mix with each other at work, our baggage will mix with somebody at home, and we get triggered, right? So that's usually what kind of happens. So the idea here is that we're here to talk about safety and team performance, but to a great extent, ultimately, what does it really mean? Kind of means more about emotional intelligence, because team performance is going to come from cohesion. And you said earlier, one of the beauties of what you guys have here at Cureton Midstream is that you have a small group of people so that there's not that much opportunity for cliques to develop, as you said. But it also sounds like it's a small enough team that we all know we need to work well together in order for this to succeed because we're so reliant on each other. Maybe at those big facilities where there's 50 team members or bigger or something like that, it's easy for beefs to go bad and cause problems. And I guarantee you beefs at work with people will probably lead to something that's a safety issue at some point. Sometimes small, sometimes great, right? So to a great extent, this is about emotional intelligence and how we do work as a team and how we function together. So. As I mentioned with my court-ordered work, I had a lot of guys turn around and say, I wish I had this in high school, so that gave me the idea of developing a nonprofit organization to try to teach some of this basic information to kids in school, so that way maybe they could avoid becoming my professional clients in their adulthood. I've worked with a lot of veterans in my practice over the last 20 years, and one of the things that I'm really excited about now that I'm living in Hawaii is that I'm working over by Pearl Harbor for one of the military family support centers and getting to work with active duty members and their families so that hopefully we can help them break the cycle of violence that they have in their homes before their kids get bigger.
Where my nephew stationed with the Air Force.
Oh, is that right? At Hickam? Nice. I'm right over there next to it. That's cool. That's great. Hope he's got a wonderful career going. So one of the things, of course, about the military folks is a lot of times the military folks have come from dysfunctional, broken homes as well. And of course, the military was a good option maybe because I didn't pay too much attention in school. And what do you know? I've met a lot of brilliant guys, a lot of guys with a ton of skill, but maybe the home I'm growing up doesn't really encourage me to study, or maybe the chaos and drama inside the house is too much and I can't study because I can't mentally and emotionally focus to do so. And I'm pretty sure that I can count on one hand the number of people I met in 20 years that decided to go to the library as their escape from this home and this chaos. my understanding is they all tended to kind of go out and party Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, every day they could, because it wasn't safe at home and they didn't want to be there. Well, if I don't do well in school, I better probably learn how to do some work with my hands or probably join the military, maybe get some motivation to go to education as well. So this is kind of a universal and common thing, and that's why, again, I hope to share all this information with you guys so that way we can actually make a difference going forward in our world, in our community, in our societies, for our families, for our friends, for our kids, all that type of good stuff. So the idea here is that with a nonprofit organization, and we can work with these kids in schools, and hopefully we can change their lives, lower the trajectory of violence in the schools, as I say. So, safety and team performance. What safety events do you recall happening in the past few years around here? What were the human factors that might have been involved? What do you guys remember? What do you think of?
We had one last week.
What happened?
I opened up a valve. It was a high pressure line going to a low pressure line, trying to utilize a new process or a piece of equipment in the process, and stuck 1,100 pounds on a line that's rated for 150.
There's a lot more to it. I looked at the MOC and it was actually installed wrong.
Okay.
According to the MOC, the piping was installed on the wrong side of the receiver, but it still would have been the same result that he did.
By the misoperation of the valve itself, it wouldn't have mattered where that was placed, you're saying?
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's the potential of human error twice. Once on the installation and whatever happened. And can you think back to what was behind that? Just lack of information about the equipment, lack of communication somewhere else? Your mind somewhere else?
Yeah, my mind was probably someplace else. I was concentrating on another issue that we had going on in the plant and not concentrating exactly on that particular piece of equipment.
And in a place like this, I can imagine that there's a lot of things on your mind because there's a lot of moving parts and it's all kind of dangerous, I hear.
Yeah.
The potential for danger is everywhere.
It's a giant bomb.
Right. Potential for danger is everywhere.
Yeah, it's a very stressful environment. 99% of the time.
And of course, obviously, for you, you learned at that moment in time, I better stay focused and not let my mind wander. Right?
Well, I was ready to leave. I mean, I'd already been here for 18 hours by the time that point.
So fatigue was also a factor. So that's another human factor is fatigue. And who knows, maybe this is something you guys look at as a company as far as shifts go, because, doctors go through this stuff in training, in resident school or whatnot, where they're working 18, 24, 36-hour shifts. They get fatigued, your brain gets fried. Yeah, absolutely. So that's a safety factor that you guys may end up looking at, who knows?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest factors that comes into play with most incidents in our industry. There's probably, I bet 80% of them are directly related to fatigue in some way, shape, or form. One that I wanted to talk about in particular was the Hookside fire. I don't think, who all knows what happened up at Hookside? All the details, what was the root cause analysis from it?
I'm under the understanding that there was a freeze, and John was blowing down to atmosphere to get rid of that freeze. Other than that,
downward was a big part of the blowing downward.
Yeah, John's
Right.
heat accidentally kicked the valve open is what he told me.
Right, so, yeah. So the main thing that really caused the whole ordeal was his fatigue. That was probably the primary culprit of the whole thing. If you look at his schedule and the 7 days prior to that, he had already worked over 70 hours. He was scheduled to go off a shift on Wednesday, but he ended up working Thursday, Friday, and Saturday covering for someone else.
So not only that, he was also receiving call-outs almost every night. That particular night, he got called out at 1:40 in the morning. And by the time he got there and got the compressor going, it was about 4:30. He had left to go start his pigging route, realized that he had forgotten his gloves back at Hookside. Once he got back to Hookside, he started double checking everything, making sure it was okay before he took off again. Found a couple freezes. He found one over at the slug catcher. He was able to break that one free. And then as he was going around checking the rest of the equipment, he found another freeze at the coalescing filter. So trying to mitigate that, he pumped some methanol into the line, and he made a mistake of opening a valve and walking away. As he was walking away, the freeze broke, and before the hydrate even hit the ground, it burst into flames. Immediately, he was engulfed in flames. He had to drop down to his hands and knees, and he army crawled about 20 paces until he felt the heat get a little bit lighter on his back, and then he was able to stand up and open his eyes. At that point, he had first and second degree burns all over his hands and face. He immediately ran over to the ESD button, hit the ESD, and then he grabbed a fire extinguisher and tried sweeping the flame out, and he was unsuccessful because all the piping and everything around it was so hot. As soon as he would get it out, it would just reignite. At that point, he went to his truck and he called Sam, who was the supervisor at the time. Sam then called Larry Palmer, and then Sam called the fire department. This all happened within a span of about 35 minutes. So at 7:04, ignition started. That's when the fire started engulfing everything and burning everything down. 7:08, he made it back to his truck and called a supervisor. 7:10, Larry Palmer was called. I believe it was 7:18, the fire department was finally called. So here we are 14 minutes later, and the fire department got called. The fire department, they were about 20 minutes out, so I believe it was 7:38 they arrived on site. At that point, the fire was already put out by Sam. He was able to get a piece of wrought iron and actually hit the valve closed. But at that point, everything was just so hot and smoky, everybody just started closing valves and trying to depressure everything, so there wasn't a massive explosion.
The ball in that valve was completely melted.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you guys know what those valves look like. Have you guys ever taken apart a ball valve? How it has those plastic rings and seats in them? It was completely gone.
I mean, the aluminum was.
So the aluminum, also on the cable trays, I have some pictures to show you guys if you guys are interested in looking at them. This is some of the aftermath of the Hookside incident. John was very, very lucky to walk away with his life this day. It was mainly due to his fatigue. He had been working way too much.
Wasn't it 22 straight days?
It was 22 straight days. And it was, I think he was on his 75th hour and on his 7-day rotation.
Middle of nowhere.
Middle of nowhere. This is just outside of Grover, Colorado. I doubt anybody actually knows where that is, but it's way out there. I'm just going to shift through these pictures fairly quickly. I believe that this was the valve that he tripped on and opened up inadvertently. It also contributed to the fire feed. Picture of the cable tray, all the melted cables. That's the actual coalescer that was engulfed and where the freeze was.
I'm curious, when I saw that picture of the valve you say he tripped on, obviously if it's dark at night, shadows and things like that, you're close to the equipment, it's easy to catch.
It
I was
is.
just curious if it's possible to retrofit some sort of protective shield around those things.
So most valves actually have a clip lock on them that you have to slide over in order to actuate them. I don't know if this one was faulty or bent or manipulated in some way, shape, or form. It's possible, but a valve that size and the way the clip sits on there, if you fall, if a grown adult falls against it, that clip's not going to hold it. It's going to break free. Transmitter completely burnt. Looks like that's the flow meter, right?
That's the plate carrier fitter.
The secondary theory is if the pebbles underneath it, due to the high pressure, could have created the spark when the pressure hit the ground.
Static electricity when bouncing around.
Or even just banging into each other.
So this is a picture of the aluminum cable tray, or what used to be the aluminum cable tray. Completely melted it into just flakes. That's how hot it was right there.
Blast furnace.
The first one was anger involved. I don't believe that anger contributed to this particular situation. Was there some frustration among the group that caused some lack of communication? Possibly. Was it the main contributing factor? I don't think so. When the root cause analysis was done, this wasn't even part of the scenario. So we're just going to pretend that it wasn't part of this, even though we knew that there was some internal conflict going on. I don't think it was in play that particular moment. Mental health issues. Who all here knew John?
I did, and I know that he was having some relationship issues.
He was having some issues at home, right? So it probably contributed to him being more than willing to be at work more than he probably should have. He was willing to put in the extra hours, take on the lack of sleep, and still come out and try to perform his daily duties, right? So whenever a person is, well, maybe you can touch on this. If they're having issues at the house, typically they're going to have issues at work, right? And that's a common trait, especially in the oil and gas industry. We work a lot of hours. Most of our marriages fall apart, unfortunately, because of it. I know I had one that happened that way too. So that was the mental health issues going on with him. He had conflict going on at the house. Substance abuse. Does anybody know about anything like that?
Whether it be drugs, alcohol. Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so there was some preliminary findings. I don't know if they actually made it onto the books or not.
I don't think so.
I remember John saying that there was extensive research into maybe substance abuse.
Right, so
Post-accident.
So I can't really speak on what the findings were, but what I can say is he was put on a, we'll call it a disciplinary program, just to monitor his actions and his performance after returning to work. Conflicts between coworkers. Where was his state of mind when it came to him and his supervisor? Does anybody know? They were starting to have some conflicts, and a lot of it had to do with there were issues that weren't being addressed, that were being brought up from the workers, and it wasn't being taken care of from the top down. Now, some of those issues was freeze mitigations. There were some genuine concerns about the freeze mitigations and how that was being fixed and handled and repaired up at Hookside. During the RCA, we found that there was supposed to be 15-watt double-wrapped heat trace wrapped on all those valves. After the install, they started pulling off the insulation because they were developing freeze points, and come to find out it was single-wrapped 8-watt heat trace, which is not enough to mitigate freezes when you're dumping from high pressure to low pressure line. It's going to hydrate off, specifically that gas too, because it's not 100% water-free. Is that coalesced before or after the dehy? It's after, isn't it? Yeah. So at the best, that you're probably going to have 3 pounds of water per scuff in that. So but it's not uncommon for it to be 7 to 10, which you can still develop a hydrate.
And methane.
Yeah, and methane. So considering all those factors that come into play, it's never just one reason that an accident happens. It is multiple reasons piled on top of each other, and fortunately this one didn't result in a fatality, but if you do look at most fatalities in our industry, typically it's 5 or more things. 5 or more things, that is what led up to that accident and the loss of life. So in order for us to try to prevent any loss of life or any incidents happening again, when we do come across a problem, we need to follow it cradle to grave. And what I mean by that is, once you find a problem, you need to keep hammering on it and keep addressing it and keep talking about it until it gets fixed and repaired. Because if you don't, then it just compounds one problem after another, and you guys shouldn't have to be dealing with these things every single day. So make sure it gets escalated to the right parties, safety, supervisor, director, wherever you need to go with it. Make sure that it gets taken care of. I've been guilty of this as well. I tend to drop the ball more than probably anybody in here. So, you know, it's everybody's job. We all need to hold each other accountable, and let's just really try to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. This was a $500,000 mistake, which is nothing compared to if he would have lost his life, right? We can always rebuild a facility. We can't give you your life back. Your family can't get you back.
And of course, what Alex was talking about with this employee that was involved with the incident, to me, sounds like just pretty much everyday life, about from what I've heard from the people that I've worked with. Having problems at home, not unusual. There's a 50% divorce rate. That means half of all relationships that got married didn't work. And of the ones that stay together, not all of them should be either together or they better get in counseling, but they don't. So there's a lot of conflicts that happen at home between people. You mentioned something like 70, 75 hours of work. One of the things that guys have taught me throughout their lives and the work I've done is that they were taught the one thing that you have to do as a man is make the bacon. Bring home the bacon, right? And basically that's almost always meant work as many hours as possible, because that's my whole job, to make the money to pay for the house and to pay for the bills and to pay for the groceries and everything else. And if we have a traditional home where we've got a partner who's staying at home taking care of the house and the kids, not making money, then that puts all the pressure on me, you, to make all the bacon. And then of course every opportunity you get for overtime, big dollars, helps our family, it seems to snowball. And I think one of the reasons that I've actually heard from the men and the women that I counseled was that they had a lot of conflicts on, he's not around the home enough to help me out. I feel very alone and isolated, and I feel like this is all on my shoulders. And then of course he feels nagged because he's exhausted, wrecked, mentally, physically, emotionally, and everything else like that. And she wants more from me that I can't give because I've been working my ass off. Sounds like a built-in set of conflicts. And one of the things I want to teach you guys about is there's needs that are involved in these conflicts. And then of course, when there's conflicts at home, how many times have men have we been taught that it's okay to drink away the pain?
That's what I was going to say.
Right? Drink away the pain. I even remember in college I had a girlfriend break up with me. I remember thinking, oh, guys are supposed to drink at this kind of situation. And I remember grabbing a bottle. I got a little bit into it. And I'm like, what the hell am I doing? This sucks. This is stupid. So I set it down. But again, unfortunately, a lot of times people I've worked with may have come home or grown up in homes where there's been addictions with their parents. And those addictions cause conflicts. And now those issues that we were kids witnessing and growing up may become part of kind of our programming that we are now dealing with in our own relationships, in our own lives. I give credit to every guy I've ever worked with. They'll grow up saying to themselves, I am not going to be like that asshole that raised me, or those assholes that came through mom's life. Or, of course, I'm not going to marry somebody like my mom type thing. Whatever the combination was. Moms, dads, stepmoms, stepdads, doesn't matter what the combination was. Somehow, if we find relationships that are not working and deteriorating, we seem to be hooked up with people who are recapitulating a lot of these problems and getting us triggered, just like when we were young. And again, we carry those issues and sensitivities forward with us onto the job site. And because they've been getting triggered at home. And then if we're coping with drinking, we're working too much, we're not getting enough sleep, we're going to be really fatigued, could be mentally and emotionally fogged, a little bit cloudy, a little bit careless, stumbling, cutting things too close, maybe hitting a valve, opening it up, et cetera, right? And then, yeah, while you guys have a really nice close-knit team and there may not be too many problems and conflicts, Lord knows I've heard plenty of the stories around in the 20 years I worked with, right? Having worked with thousands of men in particular, I've heard some stories. One of the things I loved about the work that I've done is that I had so many guys towards the end of their counseling with me, because it was usually extended 9 to 12 months as part of the court-ordered process. Somewhere around the very end of it, we'd be having an individual session and we'd be talking about how things are so much better in their homes, so much better in their lives, et cetera, et cetera. And almost invariably, I'd have guys turn around and say, you know what? Yeah. Guys at work said that they like working with me now. They say I used to be a real asshole. And actually, that's been really impactful to them, because then that way they didn't feel so isolated at work as well as at home at times, cut off and distant, pissed off with the world, right? Because we do know that conflicts between coworkers can cause safety issues. It wasn't in this case, it wasn't in your case the other day. Different job sites maybe might have more bearing. Again, I've known guys that have shot nail guns at the job site when they were in construction. I've known guys who, because of their conflicts, created a lot of safety issues because they were so mad they just weren't thinking and doing things impulsively. Whether it's throwing tools to who knows what, right? So, relationships are basically an exchange of emotional energy. What I give you, what you give me, how we react to each other, right?
No, a perfect example is the Academy Awards with Will Smith and Chris Rock.
That's an interesting one for sure, isn't it?
Yeah, he got triggered.
He certainly did get triggered, and of course, a lot of guys might turn around and say, you know, he did the right thing. He got up there and he defended his wife's honor. Yeah, it's still technically an assault. That's right.
If you're going to a comedy show, right, expect to be picked on by a comedian.
Well, that is true. That is true. But of course,
But you handle yourself better on national TV.
and Chris Rock definitely took a very personal attack at Jada Pinkett Smith.
Yes.
No doubt about it. And so, did Will cross a line? Absolutely. At first, I thought it was staged. I really thought it was staged at first, but
Started hollering and cussing.
yeah, I kind of get the idea. It wasn't. So yeah, he definitely crossed the line. And I don't care whether we're talking about hockey and the Bertuzzi incident, going all the way back for the Avs fans. That was an anger management issue as well. Because that hockey player, Bertuzzi, was pissed off about the check that he had gotten, right? And so he went back after the Avs player. And you could actually see it develop while you were watching it. Because you saw the hit, you saw that separation, you saw all of a sudden that look in Bertuzzi's eyes, and you saw him make a beeline, right? One of the guys I worked with once, love him, his name's BK, because I can't use his name, right? Former Army Ranger, truck driver around oil sites and things like this. And he was the only guy in all the years I worked with where somebody actually said to me, you know what, I'm a dangerous man. And he would talk about how at the end of his long day, he'd be in a crappy mood and he'd take a look across the truck yard and he'd look to see who had the biggest scowl on their face coming off their rig, and he'd make a beeline for him so that he could bump into them so that the guy might turn and want to throw hands because he was ready for it and wanting it. He and I worked together for 18 months. Now he's a peaceful guy. He also wrote HA. So he got into the outlaw biking world too. So yeah, he was a dangerous guy. Exchange of emotional energy. What we give each other, the vibe we give each other, right? That's all about personalities and how we often defend ourselves, defend our space, present ourselves, defending our egos, whatever you want to call it. So, what are needs? We have basic human needs. And a lot of these things get triggered when they're missing. Anger itself only needs to really be a warning sign. We don't need anger to become a problem. We just need it to be a warning sign that something is not working for us, that something is not right. Okay? So my mentor, Dr. Walsh, always used to say, all conflict comes from unmet needs. And when you think about that, when you think about a conflict you have with somebody, what's going on in that moment? What were your needs in the moment? What were their needs in the moment? Why are we having conflict? Whether it's about, I loaned you my tools and I need them back, to you yelled and screamed at me and criticized me and put me down. So, what are my needs in that moment? Probably to feel valued, probably to feel appreciated, probably to feel respected, treated with respect, right? Not treated with disrespect. And ironically, it really does come back to our childhoods. I gotta tell you, don't hate me for this, please. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm really only trying to share with you guys what is information that helps us take the world as we know it, human lives as we know it, and really it's common sense made obvious. Because once you start to hear things, it's all about saying, oh, that really makes sense. It's logical. And we've often thought that we as humans are very illogical. And of course, men in particular have always wanted to think that ladies are illogical. Well, we can be too. And when we are emotional, we can get really illogical.
When we have our menstruation cycle.
Menstruation cycle, I hadn't heard that one yet. I like that. Now, when it comes down to childhood stuff, it's really how well are we cared for? It really does come down to parent-child relationship stuff. And yes, you're adults, but you still have a child inside you. Hate to tell you, we call it the inner child. Most people have heard that term at least somewhere in their life. So when you're born, you need to be taken care of because you cannot take care of yourself whatsoever. So that's what, of course, we have parents for, right? Feed the child, clean the child, take care of the child, et cetera, et cetera. So what I always like to ask people is think about a home environment where a child is not getting taken care of, where an infant is not getting fed, where an infant is not getting rest, where an infant is not getting cleaned. What is going on in a home like that? Mental health issues, potentially depression. Mom can't get off the couch to take care of a child.
She's got too much time on the phone these days.
There could be too much time on the phone and I'm not paying enough attention to my child. There could be addiction issues. There can be mental health issues. It could be from family violence and domestic violence. A lot of depressed people have been victimized in a relationship. And then when we're depressed, we might turn to things like alcohol and drugs to feel better about ourselves and self-medicate. So now we start combining those factors. So what's going on in a home where a child is not getting the most basic of needs met? What kind of chaos is potentially going on if the child's not able to sleep? Are we talking about a house that's throwing parties 3 or 4 nights a week? Got the keg out every time? What else is going on when a child doesn't feel safe at home? Because part of our development is about the need to feel safe. That it is okay out there in the world and that it's okay to be adventurous, to take some risk as a little human being. Needs to feel safe. So we need to be free of pain. And then we also need to be free of the anxiety that is associated with expecting pain. So that's how a lot of times people, as adults, have anxiety, is because we grow up in an environment where it's unpredictable, and what is predictable is painful. So now I'm going to have anxiety about when's the pain come. And again, I guarantee it, we've all said to ourselves, I'm going to do better than what I saw or had growing up. A lot of times we don't get quite as far down that spectrum as we thought. And we carry too many of the issues that we wanted to get away from because it's like a program and it kind of kicks in. Belongingness. We all have the universal needs to feel loved, valued, accepted, important, needed, wanted, friendships, companionships. We all have these basic needs. And again, if we're growing up in a home where it's violent, where it's chaotic, where it's dramatic, that's really risky. And it probably doesn't feel like it's happening enough. All right? And how do we, as young humans, like adolescents, start getting into bad relationships? Come from a home that's got a lot of chaos and drama, and I am going to need a relationship to feel good about myself. It's my hole in the bucket theory.
Low self-esteem.
We are a bucket of emotional energy, and when we have trauma and drama at home, it's tearing a hole in that bucket, and we lose a lot of the emotional energy that we were looking for and needing as a child, as you're seeing here on this hierarchy of needs. So then later on, we sort of idealize intimate relationships like that's going to be the solution, that's going to be my savior. If somebody wants me, then that means I'm good enough finally. Because if you were to grow up with critical, judging parents, you're never going to feel good enough, are you? And then if I don't feel good enough as a person inside, I'm going to carry that with me. And then when I go to work, I might try too hard. I literally can try too hard. I can try too much, where I never give myself a break. I might try so hard that I miss pieces of the elements or pieces of the process because I'm jumping ahead in my mind, right? I might get unfocused. I might try so hard to get recognized at work, and then if I feel like I don't get it, then that's going to have a negative effect on me too. Because my expectation is that my needs are all wrapped up in this.
In an event, you have processing and interpretation. I've seen an event where, say, the mother, the father, and the child are discussing something, and all three have a totally different take on what just was said and happened.
Absolutely. That's the difficulties of being a family therapist.
I mean, because you sit there and you go, that is not what was said.
Right.
But
how it was interpreted.
You got to interpretate and you got to process it through as what really did happen.
And
the thing is, you know, when you're saying things in words, it could be the tone of voice that could throw off somebody, you know, just that much. The same words can mean something with just the tone of voice.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And also when we think about our socialization as men and women, boys and girls growing up, girls are typically taught it's okay to talk about your feelings and talk about your emotions and talk to your friends to try to work things out. Guys are not exactly usually taught to talk about your feelings. We're not even taught how to identify our feelings. We're sure as heck not taught to express and expose our feelings because those were usually going to be vulnerabilities that would be used against us. God forbid you should cry, because then you're going to be labeled a wussy or worse, right?
Well,
You were
the thing
never.
is, did you see your grandpa cry? Did you see your dad cry? Then it comes to you. You know, it's, as the chain reaction falls down,
Sure.
you probably didn't see your, on the man side,
Sure.
go into showing vulnerability.
And there's even fathers out there that think that they're going to make my son a wussy if I say I love you. And God forbid I should give you a hug and a kiss. But those fathers still exist. And those grandfathers sure as heck were around, right? So, yeah, it's our role modeling. And so a lot of times we are taught not how to communicate whatsoever. And so part of the communication problems is we are basically disabled individuals because we don't have enough vocabulary. We don't know the structure of it. And sometimes we think FU is communication enough, right? But it isn't. Now, ultimately, according to Maslow, if we get through these bottom stages, and you have to go from the bottom up, you can't feel safe if you don't get your physiological needs met. You can't feel belonging if you're not getting your safety needs met. And think about safety and belonging at a workplace. Think of workplace bullying if you're in a situation where that actually is happening, where you might get one or two people who particularly are really intimidating and dominant, and they're needing to feel powerful and strong. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is a need to feel powerful and strong when they often didn't feel powerful and strong growing up. And ultimately, only if you get all these things kind of fixed inside yourself do you get to feel this concept of self-actualized, which is kind of this inner peace. And usually once you get to that part, then you're able to come to a level where you can share with others. That's why the best mentors have really kind of worked through all this stuff. They're the calmest, they're the most patient, they're the most understanding, they tend to have the best communication and stuff like that too. Now let's just look at a simple concept called level of agitation. Basically, how angry are you? Anger itself really only needs to be a warning sign that something is not right. Something about your needs not getting met, something about your expectations being violated, okay? Something is not fitting, a boundary violation potentially, right? So, we have to figure out how to control our emotional situation so that way we don't just get sparked and set off every single time something happens, right? So I like to give people something that's very conscious to think about, and that's using this 10-point scale. Because if you don't have something conscious, you're just waiting for things to go wrong, okay? So just out of curiosity, where on the 10-point scale do you think explosion is happening?
4.
4.
About a 5.
A 5?
A 7.
7. Anybody go for 10 since it's the top of the scale? All right. Okay, so what's interesting is that, do I have it next? What do I got next? All right. What wonderful things did I come up with? Aha, there we go. So in the work that I've done, most of the people I've worked with as a group identified that their healthy communication was able to happen between a 0 and a 3. That means you got to be pretty damn calm in order to be able to listen and to communicate in a healthy way as opposed to getting into the unhealthy stuff, right? The yelling, the cussing, the shouting, and all that type of stuff. From the 4, 5, and 6, you're starting to get wound up. You're starting to get the butterflies in the stomach. You're starting to get tight. Your blood pressure's rising, getting hot under the collar. Some people start to feel things like clenching of fists. Some people start feeling clenching of teeth. Sometimes people feel tight in the shoulders. Some people start pacing. But these physiological things are starting to happen as you're ramping up. And a lot of times what's happening as you're starting to physiologically ramp up, of course, your mind is starting to spin and race about everything you don't like. All the negative thinking, all the negative thoughts, all the negative emotions, all the other things connected. And I might even start fantasizing of what I'm going to do. How am I going to teach this person a lesson? How am I going to get back? Revenge and retaliation, right? Doesn't work for wars, doesn't work for gang warfare, doesn't work on the job site either. Revenge and retaliation suck, right? Most people, most groups have identified 7 as the point of no return. And the reason they pick 7 as the point of no return is because actually that's where the verbal abuses are starting. Most people might not want to think that the explosion has happened until we got physical. Physical doesn't come without the verbal happening first. So we're going to go up this ladder if we don't if we don't break out and disengage. Okay, so I'm going to get verbal with you before I ever get physical, right? Because I'm going to warn you. I'm going to tell you what's wrong. I'm going to tell you what's right, so to speak, and I'm going to tell you what boundary to cross where I'm going to do X, Y, Z. I might tell you my consequences, right? And then, of course, you have 7 is verbal abuse, 8 is going to be more intense verbal abuse, 9 is going to be physical abuse, 10 is going to be more physical abuse. the most intense of the physical abuses. When it comes to domestic violence, I talk about going from mild to wild. And of course, on the worst end of the spectrum, we're talking about murder-suicide, right? That's as bad as it gets. And that's all about insecurities. And then you have physical abating, you got everything else under the sun underneath all that. But
Well, you got two sides. So if you got someone, you may be at a level 3 and they may be already at a level 7. So then it may not go to physical abuse immediately because you haven't migrated up.
we may both verbally escalate for a little bit before it crosses over that boundary.
Well, and your physical abuse might be somebody's lower, where if they're being susceptible to the words and the verbal abuse, I mean, for them, it might be way lower too.
So if I'm susceptible, I think is the word you're using, then I'm probably going to eventually get reactive and get hooked. I'm going to eventually let myself get triggered. I'm not going to disengage either, just like you're not disengaging.
Right.
And ultimately, that's going to be the solution, is how do we disengage to keep something from escalating before we say something that we, quote unquote, later will not regret. Because, of course, we always felt justified and rationalized in the moment. I don't regret saying that. I had every right to, right? So what are the challenges? We really do need to recognize to take a time out and not let things escalate. And I know that whole phrase, time out, is not about childhood punishment, okay? This isn't about go sit in the corner and tell me what you did wrong. This is break away. This is disengage. This is realizing I don't want to let this situation escalate. I don't want to be that asshole, right? Identify the issue factually, don't spin it. Most of the time, people are trying to defend their ego, defend their position, trying to win the argument, trying to win the thing, and so they're spinning it to make themselves look like the good guy, the other person to look like the bad guy. Just be factual.
It comes back what Todd was saying, 3 different people, 3 different...
And what am I trying to get out of this situation here? Because people definitely have something that they are usually trying to get out of it, right?
Should be motivated.
If I need to be right, and that means I need you to be wrong, I may argue till you give up.
Right.
There's all kinds of different ways that I can approach winning. I can intimidate you till you back down and back away.
Almost like a deflection.
I could also do that very manly thing and let's escalate till we throw hands, and whoever wins, because might makes right, won the argument. Because so much of what we're often modeled as men is that's how you solve problems.
Humans in general are animals,
We are. And then we also get very afraid and insecure, and we get all kinds of group psychology issues, and us versus them and me versus you, and yeah. And again, part of our egos and self-esteem is usually that we need to feel like we're right and that we're vindicated. And if I were to grow up in a family where I felt like I was always wrong, I may forcibly need to always be right because I can't handle feeling wrong. So there's always a logic to it. There's always pieces of the puzzle. One of the things I've loved about my work is that literally I feel like Sherlock Holmes, helping people figure out the pieces of their puzzle so that they can understand how these things were formed, how they fit together, how to resolve it, how to rearrange it and pack it away so that way it's not going to come back out as corrosive. That's called maturing. It's called healing. That's literally what therapy is for. So, identify the best way to express your needs and feelings. Well, first I have to understand that there is a concept of needs, which I didn't realize, and then, I'm going to have to use words that I wasn't taught how to use. I wasn't even taught existed, right? Feelings. I mean, how many guys were taught when you're growing up that you should say to somebody, I feel really embarrassed right now, or I'm feeling kind of hurt and rejected, or I'm feeling kind of alone and isolated. Were you taught to say things like that?
That's a maturity level.
I think so too.
It's always just been mad, sad, or glad.
Mad, sad, or glad, right? Write it down if you need to, because a lot of times we as men, because we weren't taught the best ways of communicating, We may even think what we want to say and play it in our head, but the minute I open my mouth, because my stomach is still churning, may still come out with a force that I wasn't planning even.
Right.
And again, whether we're talking about at work or at home, we may have the best intentions when I opened my mouth, but I let that energy come out and it reshapes what I had to say and I trip over my tongue again. And we're trying to avoid another dose of athlete's tongue where we stuck our foot in the mouth. There is no shame in writing it down so that you can say it more clearly and concisely without stumbling and starting the communication with that. There's no harm in that whatsoever. Highly recommend it. God, remain calm as much as possible. And if you start to feel yourself escalating, like you're losing your capacity, turn around and say, look, you know what? I need a break again or I'm going to lose my stuff. I need to go collect myself again and I need to get myself in a better place. This is what it means to really be a good man. To not go after conflict.
Level 7 before you talk to them. That's part of what you're saying is it's kind of a chart. So if they're on a level 7 and you're on a 4, so equals a 6 or 5.
So if you're talking, if you were the one who was at the lower level and you were cool, you were at a 2 and 3 or whatnot, this person's already at their 6.5. You may or may not want to engage with that person whatsoever out of your own safety.
Well, the chances are they're going to keep making jabs at you to get
to that level.
There's a good chance. So again, if that's what you feel like they're doing, walk away, right? Walk away and tell them, you know what? I'm not going to get into this bullshit with you, okay? I'm not going to feed into it. Walk away. And if you're the one escalating or whatnot, what I want is that you to understand that before I reach that 7, take a freaking time out. There is no shame in walking away and getting calm and coming back and saying what needs to be said instead of something you can regret, potentially. And if you don't regret it, I guarantee you somebody else will. Alex mentioned the mad, sad, and glad piece, and we refer to this as the emotional funnel. And I am not joking. If I ask a room full of guys, tell me, name some emotions, I invariably get mad, sad, and glad. And last time I checked, MSG only really belongs on Chinese food. Okay? Our bodies are capable of sensing thousands of different feelings. And the reason I use the word feelings is because we literally are feeling them in our body and in our nervous system. What do you think the difference is between the words feelings and emotions?
Emotions are psychological, feelings are...
I like it. I like it. You're on the right track. What do you think are the difference between feelings and emotions?
Feelings are what you're feeling at that time. Emotions, later on, you have time to think about it and react to it.
Maybe. Good effort. Ultimately, the whole difference is the concept of emotions is the word you're going to put on at the moment, the context of the moment. See, the feeling is something like scared, tense, nervous, afraid, okay, anxious. Those all feel very similar inside your body. But you're going to need to pick the word that matches the moment and the context of the situation. Does that make sense? So one minute I could be afraid, but another minute I just could be anxious. They're going to feel very, very similar. But it's going to be that ability to step back and slow down to understand, what am I really feeling here in the moment? But again, as men, if we were not taught to talk about our feelings, even identify feelings in the moment, all we're really left with was mad, sad, and glad.
So would emotion be the level you are having?
It could be a difference of intensity is going to be one emotion versus another emotion, different intensities. Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, they're usually kind of connected along a spectrum.
Right.
You get categories of emotions, And let me show you here what we refer to as the emotional iceberg. Because ultimately, the key to a healthy relationship is communication. And I'm sure plenty of people heard that. Key to a healthy relationship is communication. But then they don't tell you what to communicate. They don't tell you how to communicate it. So what do you think you're supposed to communicate? I'm pissed off? Fuck you?
Well,
It could be the communication could be the problem.
yeah, a lot of people,
At
in
that
this
time.
industry have a pretty basic life. What'd you do? I went to work. And then what'd you do after work? I went to the gym. I mean, what do you tell your spouse? What do you get to communicate with, right?
Well, the more you expand that, the better it tends to get.
Yeah.
And again, one of the things I've always recommended to my clientele, because usually they talk about these great divides and differences and separation between the two parties, is like, geez, just sit down and talk for 20 to 30 minutes once everything is settled down and say, how was your day? Yeah. And then shut up and listen. Because we as men, we're fixers, right? And I also joke, we can't fix a broken relationship with duct tape and baling wire. That will usually get you arrested, right?
What about grilling?
That,
You got John Deere tape.
okay, so you're right. Those things don't tend to work that well, okay? It's about communication. That's how we fix things, by talking. But again, we as men, and also the women I've worked with too, very afraid to talk about their feelings, very afraid to let their truths out. And it's almost always coming from a place of distrust. The people that were in my life when I was little were not trustworthy. Now I grow up and I don't trust nobody, so I don't share anything.
Or you had an experience and then it creates.
And usually it's more than one experience. There's a series of them, which is why we think this is the absolute rule for life. This is why we think this is exactly the way it's supposed to be.
So wouldn't those be considered generational curses?
Transgender.
That their parents did it to them, they did it to you, you're doing it to your kids. Would those be considered generational curses?
Yeah, we actually refer to it as transgenerational transmission.
Yeah, there's a doctor who's actually, doing research saying that if your parents had a tragic outcome and then you were born, that could be passed on to you.
Absolutely.
And there's evidence of that.
Absolutely.
People.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then when we realize that children are learning before they're born,
Well, they're learning from their parents. What you do at home, if your kids are at that mindset where they're at that age where they're picking up everything, you say the F word before you know your kid's saying the F word.
absolutely, they're little sponges. And adults want to think that kids are hearing nothing. They hear everything.
My little grandson, he said, that cat's really pissing me off, and he's 4, right? So I don't know who he heard that from, but I was like, you said what?
Right. Right. Well, and even when we're talking about boyfriends and girlfriends, husbands and wives who are arguing while she's pregnant, that child is hearing the conflict. The child is feeling all of her neurotransmitters and everything that's going crazy chemistry-wise because of the conflict. The baby's heart rate's going up with her heart rate. The child's hearing the conflict. And then if there's more conflict after birth, it just creates more problems for a child and the couple itself, right? So what do we need to communicate? This is really what we refer to as the emotional iceberg. We were taught typically as men that it's okay to express anger and to express sadness. I'm pissed off and I'm upset. I'm sad about this. It's okay to say those things. But, kind of God forbid to say I was embarrassed or felt rejected or I felt isolated or I felt like I was not valued. God forbid we were taught to say any of those things. But it's these primary feelings that are under the surface, just like on an iceberg. 95% of it's under the water. You only see the top 5%. Well, the anger and the depression are kind of like that tip of the iceberg. And it's all these feelings down below the surface that are what getting us upset. And if you think about it, those are the triggers. Make sense?
Yeah.
And I'll bet there's some words in there that probably resonate as far as last time you had a conflict with somebody at home, the last time you had a conflict with somebody at work. Maybe the last time you had conflict with your siblings or parents, who knows? But these are part of our basic needs and part of our human experience that we are going to react to. And then, since we were taught as men not talk about our feelings, don't deal with them, we're taught suppress them. just push them down and ignore them. They'll go away. Well, I don't know about you guys, but last I checked, there's some pretty volcanic guys out there. There's some pretty volcanic women out there too. Because a lot of girls have grown up in families where you weren't taught how to talk about their feelings either. Ladies weren't often taught about your feelings, wasn't taught that it was okay to talk about your feelings.
They might have tried, but maybe they went through rejection or something, you know?
And so therefore, I grew up in a family where, gosh, it feels like nobody really cares about my feelings. Nobody cares about my thoughts. Nobody cares about my needs. Nobody cares about me. Now I can carry that into my adult life too. Nobody cares about me. Nobody cares about me at work. Nobody cares about me at home. That's my base thoughts. I'm not going to let people in. If I distrust, I'm going to not let people in. And it's always about pain avoidance. It's always about pain avoidance. And if you hurt me, then if I lash out, F you, right? Because of course, again, it was wrong to say, hey, you hurt my feelings. Oh, what are you, some wussy?
If you guys feel any of these things, you should be able to go to your supervisor, right? Do you feel desperate in that moment? Is that what's causing your anxiousness? Is that what's causing your frustration and anger? Do you feel powerless, like there's stuff going on around you you just don't have control over? Is it too much for you to handle in that moment? Accused or criticized, right? Like, are you being blamed for something that you actually haven't been trained on, or you know, watch somebody perform well at, and you've just been expected to do it alone? You know, these are all things that you should be communicating to not only your coworkers, but your supervisors as well. We'll help you work through those things. If we're not helping you guys work through those things, you take it up another level. Because it's our responsibility that you got to make sure that you guys feel more than capable of doing your job.
And if you think about this as well, a lot of times those messages we're taught as a child is that we are supposed to be able to take on all challenges and basically not ask for help. That somehow asking for help is a sign of weakness or a sign that you're stupid or something that's going to be wrong about you. So we were taught not ask for help. We're taught just get it done. Don't complain about this, just get her done, all that type of stuff. And so what ends up happening a lot of times is you'll have too much on your plate, too much on your shoulders. You might need help. You might not have all the information you have. You may need manpower. But of course, if I'm not supposed to ask for help and I'm supposed to take care of everything myself, now I'm getting frustrated. Now I'm getting annoyed, now I'm getting irritated, now I'm getting angry with my situation, and I'm probably going off a little bit, and who knows if a safety issue could come around from it, right? Because I'm pissed off. Because I'm not clear in my head. And again, all we got to do is ask for help usually. But we are not taught to ask for help. We don't know how to ask for help at home, and a lot of times we don't know how to ask for help at work, right?
Can we take 5?
Yeah, we can take 5. Good. Absolutely. Okay, so we were just looking at this emotional iceberg, of course. It's these primary feelings that get triggered that we have to learn to communicate. And first, we have to learn to identify them. You can find lists of feeling words on the internet. I've often given them out as handouts in group when we're talking about communication and stuff like this with my therapy groups. There's one list that has like 5,000 feeling words. 5,000. And of course, that's just excessive. But at the end of the day, expanding our vocabulary just helps a whole lot. And a lot of these words we've probably heard of, but we might not have ever conceptualized or thought about too consciously. How do you communicate them? What's the structure of it? Well, let's move on. Basically, you want to try to figure out kind of that who, what, where, why, when, and how type of stuff. And you're trying to say, I feel. Yes, you're going to say, I feel. And it's funny because in the 20 years of court-ordered work, I can't tell you how many guys have come in who's never happy about it, of course, and never believes they need to be there, but they do. You're not going to turn me into some wussy, you know? You're not going to turn me into some girl by making me talk about my feelings. And I'm like, no, you're right. I'm just going to turn you into a better man. because, yeah. And, you know, I'll joke with these guys and it's like, look, I will teach you how to talk about your feelings. And you don't have to worry, your penis will not fall off. It won't fall off, you won't be wrapped in a skirt. And actually, if you do a good job of learning to talk about your feelings, especially at home, you get to use it more frequently. Because you just might be surprised at the research out there that suggests that a partner might be more interested in being sexually intimate when she likes how she's being treated. When she's feeling treated with respect and dignity. So go figure, right? Seems like somebody wasted some money on that research, but it seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? So I feel embarrassed. I feel rejected. I feel unimportant. I feel ignored. I feel whatever when this behavior is happening. So something is happening. Something is going on. You're doing something. You're not doing something. You're saying something. You're not saying something. It's one of those four things. So I feel XYZ when ABC is happening, and then because is going to vary. It may connect back to some more feelings. A lot of times where you really want this to go is to try to connect it back to past experiences. Because really what I want you to understand is I want you to understand where these feelings come from for me in my life. And of course, ultimately, this is the height of vulnerability and learning to expose yourself. And if I have a relationship where I can trust you, it's not going to get used against me. So again, whether this is at home or at work, I hurt. I feel these things when these things are done. So I feel unimportant when you don't talk to me. And of course, it reminds me of my parents giving me the cold shoulder when I was a kid. Okay, I gave you a piece of information that maybe can resonate, and so now you don't want me to feel that triggered with you. And then that's how we work through these things, is by literally sharing where do these feelings come from. And again, they almost always go back to our childhood roots, things that didn't operate and feel quite right. So don't worry, you don't have to give up your man card, and no, it's not going to fall off. And you guys can print that. You guys can put that one up on the wall too. The I feel statements, if you want, right?
I had to have that conversation with Larry the other day. I was like, hey, you know, I kind of feel neglected. I really don't talk to you. I don't get any guidance from you. You know, I kind of need a little bit more leadership from you. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was doing that. So now he calls me every day, and we have, you know, even if it's just a 2-3 minute conversation.
Who is this?
Larry. I had to have that conversation with him.
I had to give him an option. I just call in to make sure.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're feeling neglected or something, you have to express that to people that you're feeling that against, you know.
But you know what you just said is about getting your needs met. If I need to talk to you, I'm calling you. Right. This is how I get my needs met. I make a phone call. I act.
So, what is it called when the person has developed this aura around them to where everyone's after me? They're all...
Paranoia?
Yeah, it's, you know, it's, you know, but they always feel like everything's against them. If they do it, oh, they're going to try to do this to me.
The sad reality is that a lot of people have really grown up in uncomfortable situations where it felt like things were really against them. Siblings, parents, peers in school. It really does happen. Of course, what probably gets stuck with them is that they get stuck on the negative half of the equation, so they never believe anything positive can happen.
So the glass is half full or half empty?
In a sense.
Well,
And you have optimists and you have pessimists.
I mean, I was an athlete all through college, but and quicksand does occur. When one thing happens, then another one, and you just start sinking. So and that's, you know, part of it is...
Well, if I develop enough negative thinking about it, I won't ever bother trying again, because there's never going to be a point in my mind of trying, because everything's going to always go against me. And then that's usually kind of the heart of sabotage and self-sabotage, is not trying. And then usually picking the most illogical reaction. is usually where we sabotage. And the funny thing about sabotage as adults, whether again it's at home or at work, is if we go through particular difficulties, traumas, whatever you want to call it, adversity at home, growing up, various patterns and things like that, we will develop coping mechanisms to try to deal with the situation. Because as children, we basically have a mechanism built into us to survive, regardless of what the adversity is. We're supposed to grow up to become big people to make more little people. Okay? That's part of our nature. So the mechanisms that we choose to survive these adversities usually become what sabotages us later on in our adult life. So if there was enough crap going on at home that I go hide, and hiding means go to the park to play with your friends. Hiding may mean go to my room and get into my music or get into my computer or get into whatever, right? If I go hide to survive, now as an adult, I will also want to disengage and go hide because there's a conflict that I don't want to deal with.
Like we were talking about the incident outside with the employees, you know.
Okay.
You work so many days, right?
Potentially. Potentially I'm hiding from my marriage and working extra. Yes, I've known guys that did not want to go home from work because they didn't want to face their partner.
Yeah.
So if I hide, how do I hide as an adult? Well, as an adult, I might hide by going off to the bar with my buddies. I might hide with a 12-pack after work and the TV. I may hide by wrenching in my garage all night. I might hide by doing my rodeo stuff, whatever it looks like. But I might hide. And when I'm hiding, of course, there's a disconnection, and now my partner's going to feel the disconnection, and that's going to get her triggered. Because invariably, I will bet you that from her childhood, she felt distant and disconnected and unimportant and unloved. And so now my actions trigger her actions. And then now we have conflict coming from both of these sides. To a certain extent, that's going to happen with work relationships as well. So the thinking, negative thinking. If I were to grow up in a family where I don't think people care about my opinion, nobody cares about my opinion, am I going to share my opinion at work? No, because nobody cares about my opinion. I'm not going to share my opinion until I'm too pissed off and my volcano erupts and blows. And then I blow my stack and I throw my shit down, or I throw a tantrum or whatever that looks like, right? I go off on somebody. Whatever, who knows? But if I don't believe people are going to care about my opinion, I'm not going to bother sharing it. If I expect people will use everything against me, I'm not going to share it. If I don't believe I'm smart enough, if I don't believe I'm good enough, I'm not going to share it. Make sense?
Sometimes you don't need to share it. Negative breeds negative. If it's nothing but negative, you can take a person's day and turn it.
Yes.
Being totally negative.
So we may have to consider then when we share what's negative on the inside, and usually that's too late.
Right.
Usually we're going to create a problem with how I shared it and what I shared, and it's going to come off caustic, it's going to come off toxic, it's going to create bad blood, it's going to create some more FUs coming back at me.
So it's a balancing scale type thing.
Yes.
I know for me personally, right, even if I'm not feeling that great, say Monday morning comes, I purposely try to get to work early, you know, like, because you don't want to get to work late, right? That just can set the whole time.
Sets it off, right?
Off, you know. And
you mean the anxious drive with the white knuckles because I'm speeding and watching for cops too?
No.
Road rage.
But I just know myself well enough, you know, that like I try to set myself up for little successes throughout the day, you know,
right,
and little accomplishments.
It's important to do that.
Yeah.
So when we also look at our thought processes, not only are we needing to look at kind of this concept of our beliefs and what we expect, but cognitive distortions are our methodologies and how we think. Is that coming up big enough? And this is just a simple list here. All or nothing thinking. So basically something's either all good or all bad. There's no gray area, there's no middle ground. That's a problem because we're going to get stuck out there on the sides. We can overgeneralize as if everything is always happening. It's never going to be anything different than this. It's always universalized. The mental filter, I kind of like to conceptualize like a coffee filter. What does a coffee filter catch?
Coffee.
Okay, you put all the grounds in it, right? To brew the coffee?
Yeah.
And then the coffee is what we're really trying to catch in the pot, right?
So it takes out the impurities.
So the filter is left with what's left over. And in the concept of our thinking, a lot of times it's what's going to be filled with what's negative. So our mental filter on a cognitive level may be collecting all the negative data and negative information in life. And while the coffee is being made, it pours off and we don't even notice where it's collecting because we don't see the good things that are happening in our life. We're only focused in on the negatives. So that's the mental filter.
Yeah, but don't you always throw that filter out when you're done with it?
No, we're human beings. We just let it keep filling up with more data.
What you do is you pack it down.
You just pack it down, you just pack it, you tamp it. That's right, you tamp it and pack it. Tap it and pack it.
Every day.
And of course, going with that mental filter that's collecting all the negative stuff, you have disqualifying the positive. So I can ignore the good things that happen. I can ignore the praise somebody gives me. I can, because I don't expect it. I reject it for whatever reason. Maybe I wasn't used to getting praise when I was growing up. And so now if I get praised, I don't know how to even handle it, internalize it. And if I reject praise, what am I doing to myself, right? But I promise you also, if I reject praise, I'm probably going to hang on anything critical and judgmental.
Well, let's say if they gave you a good job, you'd be thinking, I wonder what they want out of me now.
Maybe.
I mean, I'm just thinking.
And again,
people think of a lot of things.
Right.
You know?
So think of how much distrust is associated with that, right?
I don't think like that. You know me more better than that. I'm just, I was going to be a psychologist before I ended up doing a lot of this stuff.
But yeah, think about that. It's like, oh, the more I give them, the more they're going to take. Yeah, possibly. Jump into conclusions. I'm pretty sure as human beings that we may be a little bit prone to jump into conclusions and assuming we know all the answers before we ask a question. I promise you, in a lot of conflicts, we do a lot of jump into conclusions. And of course, if we talk about insecurity within relationships, there's a lot of jump into conclusions through suspicions. I suppose at work that one might be different, not so much around my workers cheating on me, right? But I might jump to conclusions about what I think his intentions were. I might jump to conclusions about what's going on inside that person. I might jump to some conclusions of what they meant by what they did or said. And I may be wrong. We have an ability to magnify or catastrophize situations that happen. On the flip side, especially when ego defense comes into it, we might be able to minimize and reduce the significance of what happened. I mean, we were talking about the safety incident earlier today. Minimizing it would be, you know what, he just simply tripped over a valve and just, freak accident. But if you look further, there may be pieces of a puzzle that connect together that could contribute to being negligent and not paying enough attention and being careful enough.
Like Todd knows, because he's a safety guy, but they pretty much say almost 100% of every accident's preventable, right?
Yes. And it could go back even if it's equipment failure wasn't maintenance properly.
Right. It could not have been. It might have been manufactured wrong. It might have been installed wrong, like you were talking about with your valve.
Or like you were saying, if he tripped, right? Could there have been something around there so he could not have tripped?
That was the first thing that struck me. I'm sure there is a clip on the handles to keep them from supposedly getting moved and bumped. But the first thing that struck me is why is there not a foot guard that would keep your feet from kicking it?
Yeah, these facilities are just full of tripping hazards. It's trip beast.
Some guard that would keep your foot from kicking a ground level valve. That's just my layman's thing, Emotional reasoning. This is somehow that because I think it and feel it, I must be right. How could I possibly be wrong? This is my life, this is my experience, and this is my interpretation, so therefore my interpretation and perceptions must be correct. Well, maybe not always.
And I always tell everyone, and I think Alex touched on this earlier, was about the communication. He says, well, if you got a problem, you let me know. And see, when I was growing up, my grandmother always said, the more people you put in the bathtub, the less likely you are to drown. So the more people you get involved, they can help you, and maybe to set things in a different direction. Maybe they see something, you're tunnel visioned at the time because you have a problem. So if you open your mind and get someone else involved, maybe they got a different perspective and they can kind of guide you in a different direction.
I like that. The more people you put in a bathtub, less likely you are to drown.
Well, and look, let's talk about like grandparents. My grandpa had said, and I don't remember what president it was, but he said that one president wasn't the smartest, but he surrounded himself by
smart people.
you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So similar to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Shoulds and must statements. These are high pressure and demanding statements. We use them all the time with people, especially when we're upset. They should have this. They should have that. They should not have this. They should not have that. You must do this. You must not do that.
That's pretty common in the workplace.
It's common in all life. It's common with everything. She should have cleaned the dishes. She should have vacuumed the house. He should have done this. He should be taking out the trash.
You've been in my house.
I've been in everybody's house, it seems. It seems I've been in everybody's house. But these are absolutes, and there's no wiggle room, which means that as soon as somebody doesn't meet this expectation, this set of thought processes, they've automatically violated those expectations, and now we're going to be upset about it.
Absolutely.
Because we have enough compulsive tendencies to ourselves that we expect things to be just like so. Because we've got this cognitive schema built up around how we suspect life is supposed to operate, how things are supposed to work. What we want to do is we want to turn it to an I would prefer. I know that sounds simple. I would prefer it if this happened as opposed to this must happen. The whole changing it to I would prefer it if gives you just a little bit of wiggle room, just a little bit of leeway for error. And that I'm not setting myself up to be upset when it may not go exactly the way I was hoping. Right? So I would prefer it if. Then labeling and mislabeling, it's easy to do this where we can throw the wrong labels on a situation, and so therefore we're adding to our misinterpretation. And then personalization, as if somehow on a negative level everything's coming back to me. It's always my fault. I'm the one who's always in trouble. We over and personalize, and we kind of probably go into a little bit of a pity party, martyr, victim kind of place, and over personalize things. It's always about me. All right, so far so good? And here we go, guys. What you don't really know is that you're afraid. And fear is our greatest motivator. It motivates us to do some great things. It can motivate us to do some very negative things. In terms of a relationship, outside of work, at home, okay? Let's say I have a realization that I may not treat you with enough respect, and I fear losing you. On a certain natural level, I might just turn around and think, okay, the better I get at communicating, the better I get at treating this person, the better I get at respecting and showing this person all these positives, that person's not going to want to leave me, will they? Because I'll be doing such a great job, why would they want to go? But when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner relationship stuff, a lot of times we pick just the opposite. I pick an illogical method of how to keep you. And in terms of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, I'm trying to erode your self-esteem. I'm trying to take your self-confidence. I'm trying to take your self-respect. Because then that way, if you see yourself as broken, then that nobody will want you, then you won't possibly leave me. Because ultimately, I'm really too afraid to say, I'm desperately afraid of losing you. That would be vulnerable communication. I'm desperately afraid of losing you. I realize I'm doing some things wrong. What do you need me to do different? How do you help? Can you help me fix this? But instead, we tend to go just the opposite direction and screw it up more, make it worse. So fear is our greatest motivator. You can do a lot of things, like I'm afraid of failing, so I might work 70 hours a week because I think that if I don't, I might get fired. That would probably be some faulty thinking, but I could think it, right? If I don't take on everybody else's jobs when they ask me, maybe they won't like me. Maybe they'll reject me as a person. And so I say yes every time somebody asks me if I can do something.
Yes, man.
The yes man can't say no. And then, of course, at some point, I'm really pissed off at myself and my life schedule because I haven't got enough time to do everything I agreed to do.
And you get upset with them.
And then I don't have enough time for myself. I don't have enough time to decompress. I don't have enough time to relax. I'm mad at them and I'm mad at me. All right. So you got to play Sherlock Holmes. What are you afraid of? Because fear can motivate you positively or negatively. What are you thinking? Where's the proof? Where is the proof and evidence that what I'm thinking is correct? A lot of times we are operating again off of those assumptions. How would other people see this? Would everybody see it exactly the same way as I would? Or are there other perspectives out there that I could work with and operate from? Insecurities such as jealousy and envy are really fear of loss and inadequacy. So if I'm feeling more self-confident in myself, feeling good about how I'm operating, feeling good about what I'm doing in your life, I won't have the same fears about potentially losing you. Of course, feeling attacked or criticized is one of those things that as human beings we seem to dislike a lot. And even though my dad was great, boy, he could be critical. It sure didn't feel good to find out everything that seemed to be wrong and needed to be fixed. I don't know anybody yet that's liked it. I haven't found anybody yet. If we feel unimportant or ignored. So these are the different things that we're looking for as far as what's going on inside me that I need to understand so that I can actually try to either change within myself or communicate with you so that way we can change these things together. And again, as a team here, learning how to be vulnerable with each other is actually really critical and important too, as part of how we bond as a group of people, because I need to understand what's going on in Tyler's world if he is having a bad day. Because it's going to happen. You might have a bad morning, you might have a bad day. Now, if you come in a little raw, I might need to give you a little tolerance and a little leeway and not get all butthurt and upset and react back on you and make it worse. All right, you know what, Tyler's usually in a pretty good place. I'll give him the space for that. I'm sure to work through it. Versus, oh, what's your fucking problem? Right?
I would just lead with that.
How many arguments do you think have started with where the fuck have you been?
Oh, I bet there's been quite a few.
Right?
My wife, she asked me, where are you going? I was like, I'm going out. She's like, when are you going to be back? I'm like, later.
Being Mr. Vague. Yes.
It's like, no, I'm kidding.
And she just wants a little bit of specific information, right?
That's how I could always get her goat.
I see. So, of course, when I'm leading with where the F have you been, ultimately what I'm probably trying to say is I'm a little scared and worried about where you've been, potentially what you've been up to, or, you know, the weather out there sucked. I know the roads were really bad. I knew that you needed new tires on your car and you hadn't got them yet. Maybe I was a little worried you were skidded off on the side of the road. Who knows? Or, yeah, I could be afraid of some of those worst things that can happen. And of course, the reason I carry those fears is because maybe mom and dad had those issues. Maybe I've gone through these things with my past partners. Maybe I've even been done wrong in our relationship here too. So yes, my trust level may be really low. So my fears and insecurities are really high. And now there's my conflict of needs. So when it comes to conflict also, we each have kind of our own conflict style, and this is going to be based partly on our personality. Whether we have kind of a passive personality or whether we have kind of an aggressive personality, how are we going to do conflict? So the basic conflict styles are, I'm conflict avoidant, And pretty much everybody I've worked with would say they were avoidant of conflict. Even the people who got into a lot of conflict would still tell me that they were conflict avoidant. However, what they did was they used conflict as a weapon. They used conflict to try to take control of the situation to get the outcomes that they were looking for. Okay? So that's kind of intimidation, right? Could be bullying. It could be yelling and screaming so that way you just walk away and leave me so I'm winning victoriously. There's conflict friendly. And there are a lot of people that don't seem to be very averse to conflict whatsoever. They're very fast to get in your grill, very fast to get in your face. I used to joke that sometimes you could get out and, you get out of your car in the Home Depot parking lot and you can just tell when they get out of their truck because of the look on their face. Kind of like that look BK was talking about. He was checking out, from guys when you get out of their rigs in the yard. So if I'm conflict friendly, which means I'm not afraid of conflict, then I kind of have to check in and look at how do I do conflict? Do I do it in a way that's validating and respectful, or do I do it in more of a explosive, controlling, high conflict method, right?
I think it can change on the situation based being over the phone or in person.
It can. Definitely things like that can happen where I might say something more by phone where I wouldn't say it in person, or I might say it in person but not in phone, or I might be willing to blow up your text message but I wouldn't say it to your face. Yeah, all that stuff can happen for sure. And then most people have heard about passive aggressive. What do you think passive aggressive is? Because if passive is avoiding conflict and aggressive looks like getting into conflict, what do you think passive aggressive is?
It means you let it go until you brew on it for a while and then you come back and handle your business?
Maybe.
You make it seem like you don't want a conflict or argument, but you say things that do the exact opposite of that.
It's like you're trying to do it on the real DL, right?
Yeah.
On the down low, so I'm trying to be real subtle with my anger. I just like to call it a quiet FU.
Pretty much, yeah.
So if I'm giving you the cold shoulder, which is a very passive-aggressive behavior, I kind of want you to know I'm upset, right? Because I want you to be thinking about whatever it is I'm so upset about. So if I'm giving you the cold shoulder very passive-aggressively, I'm purposely ignoring you and I want you to know it.
I think my daughter calls that gaslighting.
Nope, gaslighting is a different process. That's basically where I will talk you to death until I win. And I will also talk you in a circular set of arguments until you end up agreeing with me too. Yep.
I have an older sister that did that.
So, conflict avoidant versus conflict friendly, and then there's got to be this concept of whether we're validating or volatile. So if I'm validating, I care about your perspectives, I care about your opinions, I'm listening to what you have to say, I'm taking that information in, we're probably looking to negotiate, compromise a little bit here or there. If I'm volatile, you guys know the concept of volatility around here, right? Isn't that explosive if I hear right? So if we think about volatile personalities, volatile anger, we're going off. All right. And of course, the going off piece has got a lot to do with that emotional iceberg and how much of that stuff am I packing in and not talking about and processing. So who are you? Well, simplistically, this triangle, a little bit like that emotional iceberg, is going to describe a bit about what you got going on and who you are as people. Because ultimately, it really just breaks down to what you think, what you feel, and what you do. Now, people who are doing behaviors or actions that are not healthy for them are usually playing off a whole lot of negative feelings and a whole lot of negative thoughts. I cannot change my feelings without heavy substance abuse or lying to myself, okay? The only way I can truly change the feelings that I don't like to deal with is how do I change my thinking and how do I change my actions. Only by making changes in those two places can I actually feel different and better about my life. If I'm tired of and feel bad about not having good relationship with people, and I realize that every word out of my mouth is F you might not want to have many conversations with me. If I were to change my tone of voice, if I were to change my vocabulary, might people want to talk with me a little longer? There's a chance. If I were less defensive, might people come to me with things more frequently? If I was less reactive, would people come to me more frequently? Right? If I develop more positive beliefs instead of the negative beliefs, will I develop more positive behaviors that get me closer to the goals that I'm asking for or looking for? Can I move us closer to mutual goals together? So, we can only change what we think and what we do. So how do I act? Behaviors are an attempt to change how we feel. We act or react to change the situation at hand. We might seek companionship when we feel lonely. And by the way, lonely is the worst word in getting into my next bad relationship if you're not careful. Because it's easy to find another bad relationship if that's been my history. We may want to run and hide from conflicts when they arise, or we may act aggressively to take control of a situation. It takes a lot of confidence and literally self-respect to stay calm in a conflict coming at you. Because you have to have the confidence that I can handle this. I don't have to believe that I need to step up and take control or this, that, or the other. Bullying. Most people are afraid of bullying, or not afraid of bullying. Most people know and understand bullying because they saw it usually in school growing up. Some of us were bullied. Some people did the bullying. The kids that are doing the bullying, there's only one reason that they're doing it in the first place, and that is, one, they are insecure and they felt powerless already in their life. They typically felt powerless growing up at home where I could not protect my parent, I could not protect myself, I could not protect siblings. And as men, I could have sworn that we were taught that we are supposed to be strong, that we are supposed to be powerful, that we are supposed to stand up to conflicts, that we are supposed to protect our family. But again, unfortunately, if we're growing up in a home where we're taught all those things, but we have people acting differently and hurting other people, then our compassion as a kid kicks in, but then I can't do anything to help out. Maybe I even tried to help out and got hurt, and now I'm scared and I feel weak. Quite literally, I can develop self-hatred because I feel weak and scared as a boy, and I am not allowed to be that way as a boy. And since I hate myself, now I have to go find ways to feel strong. And the only way to truly go feel strong is to go find a victim. To go find somebody to take this out on and to bully in place. So now that I get to feel strong and feel aggressive and feel like a man. So that's where a bully comes from. And then, of course, if I've been bullied, at some point in my life, I may decide to take control in my adult relationship. And because I'm too afraid of not having control. Eating disorders. More girls develop eating disorders than men, but eating disorders are anxiety related. If I grow up feeling like I don't have any control in my life, I can control my food intake. That's literally what eating disorders are about, is controlling food intake based on anxiety, based on feeling a lack of control growing up. You guys ever seen the show Hoarders? Okay. Hoarders is all about anxiety and fear of loss, which is why I can't get rid of anything, which is why I can't give anything away, why I can't throw anything away, because I'm afraid of loss. Something happened in my life probably where I lost somebody close to me, somebody meaningful to me. Okay? cultures of modeling and dance and beauty pageants and stuff like that contribute to these often for girls, gymnastics where they have to be so small and petite and whatnot. So there's a lot of pressure on girls in these kind of fields. There's a lot of pressure in boys in sports and other things like that too. And we're just trying to control how we feel. Substance abuse is another behavior to try to change how I feel. And of course, substance abuse is ultimately about trying to numb up about the things I don't want to feel and the things I don't want to think. If I drink enough, I won't think about them. I won't feel them. If I get stoned enough, or whatever stuff I use, tweak, whatever. Of course, they're maladaptive coping mechanisms and they don't work in the long run. Once you sober up, all the pain comes back and I got to have another hit. We teach others how to treat us. And this kind of comes back to part of this in the beginning. That exchange of emotional energy, what I give off to you, the vibes I give you are going to trigger how you want to react to me. If I start giving you some aggressive vibes and I can't be weak and I got to be in control, you're probably going to aggress back against me, aren't you?
That's my personality.
Right? Because probably it was painful, if not damaging and dangerous, if I didn't stand up for myself enough, right? So we teach others how to treat us. And this comes down to the fact that we look and associate our life and interpret how did other people treat us growing up. So it starts with how people treated me. How do I internalize it? That then translates into how do I think and feel about myself growing up? Do I see myself positively? Do I see myself negatively? How did I treat myself? You might be surprised, maybe not, to hear that in the world of work I've done, I met a lot of people that seem to hang out with the bad crowd. They hung out with the stoners. They hung out with the bad crowd. They hung out with the kids that were drinking, hanging out with the kids that were smoking dope, hanging out with the kids that were vandalizing things. That's how I treated myself. I used drugs. I used alcohol in my teenage years because of how I saw myself and how I saw my life. And then, of course, because we're internalizing and bringing all this world and experience into ourselves, we are deciding how I need to act and react towards it. And so, therefore, how do I treat others? And again, ultimately, as people, we only have a few choices that we are aware of. Or maybe we weren't even aware of them. We're either passive, where we probably take too much stuff and we're too afraid to speak up for ourselves. We're aggressive. We're too afraid of what could happen to us. We're too afraid of not having control. We're too afraid of having somebody get the upper hand on us, so I'm aggressive. Or I'm passive-aggressive, which is the quiet FU. At least it's not as bad as what I could do, right? What everybody's really trying to get to is assertiveness. Because if I'm passive to you, I invite you to be aggressive with me. If I'm aggressive with you, I invite you to be aggressive with me. Or if I'm aggressive at you, I may be trying to get your passive stuff to kick in so that way you back away and leave me alone. Assertiveness is where that confidence, self-esteem, and self-respect come in from, because now I'm confident enough that I can communicate with you in a healthy way. It's okay to expose my vulnerable feelings because they're not going to get used against me. And if you do use them against me, then I just knew who you were. And now I won't trust you going forward. Assertiveness and compassion are the cure. Assertiveness is the internal strength and confidence to be able to clearly and concisely communicate your needs, communicate your feelings, communicate your thoughts. It's about the ability to listen to others and care about their experience with you. And if it isn't about their experience with you, it's about their experience in life. Because they came from somewhere. They also have a home. They also pay taxes, and they also have to deal with everybody else on I-25. Hopefully as little as possible, but they're there, right? Compassion. Compassion is one element that seems to be very lacking and missing in the world at times. because it seems everybody took a bit of a dose of F you. It seems like everybody took a bit of a dose of F the world. Kind of like F the world F'd me, right? If I've been done so wrong in the world growing up and I think that my life was sort of crappy, then screw everybody, right? As soon as I do that, I'm not caring about anybody else's experiences. I'm not caring about anybody else's world. There's no compassion associated with that. There's no empathy. And again, as healthy and mature individuals, we want to be compassionate and empathetic because that's how we show we care for other people that are in our world. And if somebody came from a world where they grew up thinking that people don't care, that's how you, as one individual, get to make a difference. One individual, you get to make the difference by showing care and compassion to somebody else. And when you look at kids that are going through the alternative high school systems, not making it in the mainstreams, most of them are coming from pretty high drama, high trauma houses, where they feel like nobody cares about me, nobody cares about my experience, and of course they have been abused. And the statistics are terrible, especially for young ladies. Research has shown that all they need is one teacher to show something compassionate and caring about them to be able to make a difference. One person to treat them as they're real and genuine and to treat them with respect and dignity. That's all it takes, one person. Now you can be that one person here at the job site, you get to be that one person at home, you get to be that one person in the grocery store. You can be that one person everywhere you go, where you're trying to be understanding of others and their experiences. So our core values that I picked for STARS, so again, been doing this work for 20 odd years. One of my favorite exercises to do with my men and women's groups are, I'll have them list, what are characteristics of healthy people? What are characteristics of a good man? Is usually how I head that. And you start getting things like strong, works hard, fixes things. When it comes to being characteristics of a good man, what more comes to mind?
Integrity, respect.
Right? Okay.
Responsible.
And the whole reason I picked these 7 is because these things seem to be missing in most of the lives of my clients. People coming into my world for professional counseling, especially when ordered by the courts, did not have balance in their life. They didn't have balance between work and home. They were usually way out of balance because all their time was going to work and not enough time going to home. So there were conflicts at home. They were wrecked inside. They weren't feeling healthy and balanced on the inside themselves. If they grew up around a lot of distrust, they still had a lot of distrust in their adult life. They may not have grown up with adults who showed integrity. So therefore themselves, they may not have always shown integrity. It may be whatever I can get out of life, whatever I get away with. Often didn't show responsibility, or maybe that responsibility factor is a little out of balance as well. I may over-apply the concept of responsibility. And of course, if that's the case, I'm going to get mad every time somebody is not responsible, and I judge them. Teamwork. Most people I've worked with have not come from a place growing up where there was good teamwork at home. Maybe the teamwork that they saw came from the military, but it didn't necessarily mean that there was good teamwork where they worked. And they themselves were not often a good team player. Now, I joked around with myself for a long time, including back and forth with Alex, about how I wanted to start today's discussion. It says safety and team performance, right? I was thinking I was going to write on the board emotional and relationship intelligence. I was expecting to get some groans and some, oh, really? Right? And then I'm like, oh, okay, you guys don't like that, so I was going to erase it and go, okay. How many of you think that you work with a bunch of assholes? And usually somebody's going to put up their hand in a big enough room. And then the next question, how many of you think that sometimes you might be that asshole on any given day? because you're in a crappy mood, because life's not going well, because you don't care about anybody else in the moment. I think that answer still can be kind of high, right? So the whole idea is, how do we do this better with each other and for ourselves? Because ultimately, this is literally looking to be a gift for yourself, because then you get to create better internal peace by becoming more conscious about these issues. And that's really what change comes from, is consciousness. What information can you take out of this that allows you to look at yourself and to look at the people you live with, look at the people you work with, and how do we use this information to improve all of our relationships, all of our dynamics? And equality. A lot of times people didn't come from very equal places, came from very imbalanced places. One person's in control and one person has to jump, right? And again, when it comes to equality, we may not make the same equal income, but equality may come from the standpoint of us both contributing to our end results. If we're having enough discussion to find a balance, we will find an equality that works for us. So a lot of these core issues seem to be missing in the people's lives that I worked with, which is why I ended up picking them. And a friend once asked me, how can you remember these? It took me a little while to try to figure it out, and I got some help from one of my groups. But ultimately, in my professional world, everybody I met coming in was bitter. Bitter with life, bitter with their situation, bitter with the legal system, etc. But by the time they left, they were better. Except that's BETTIRR. Balanced, equality, trust, teamwork, integrity, respect, and responsible. They come in bitter, they leave a little better. Because they concentrated and focused in on something on a conscious level, and they decided to do something different for themselves.
And they work towards it.
And if you've got kids, whether you've got sons or daughters, I'm just gonna let this sit there. So we need to teach our daughters to distinguish between a man who flatters her and a man who compliments her, a man who spends money on her and a man who invests in her, a man who views her as property and a man who views her as properly, a man who lusts after her versus a man who loves her, a man who believes he is God's gift to woman and a man who remembers that a woman was God's gift to man. And then teach our boys to be that kind of man. Again, part of this concept of changing locker room behaviors and attitudes was how many times on a Friday night guys were talking in the locker room after their football game about who they were hoping to get wasted so they could get down their pants. Let's be real. Okay? And then sadly, when we look at statistics, 1/3 of all girls before the age of 18 are being sexually assaulted or molested. And it's always by somebody that they know and is close to them. 1/3 are getting exposed to inappropriate sexual materials and behaviors. So only 1 out of 3 girls really escapes their childhood unharmed. And girls going into college, this is a nationwide statistic consistent from university to university. 20% of college teenage girls, that's freshmen and sophomore girls, are getting sexually assaulted every year. And of course, a lot of times it's happening because they've gone to a party and a guy's tried to get them drunk, maybe slipped them a roofie. Maybe it's a girl who's starting to date a guy and she owes me sex because I took her to dinner and paid for it. Whatever. Too many times guys are just trying to take advantage out there. And they do. So 1/5 of all the girls out there are getting sexually assaulted in college. And 1/3 of them before they turn 18, of all girls. So that issue particularly is highly prevalent in domestic violence relationships, of course, by the way. And then about 1 out of every 6 guys is sexually assaulted or molested before the age of 18. And about double that are guys that I've worked with in my private therapy, in my therapy groups. So again, high prevalence in relationship violence of these things happening back in our childhood. This is another one that's kind of important and liberating for people because a lot of times they feel very obligated to their families, to their parents, to their siblings, who are the ones that are mistreating them and doing them wrong. So you don't ever have to feel guilty about removing toxic people from your life. It doesn't matter whether someone is a relative, romantic interest, employer, childhood friend, or new acquaintance. You don't have to make room for people who cause you pain or make you feel small. It's one thing if a person owns up to their behaviors and makes an effort to change, but if a person disregards your feelings, ignores your boundaries, and continues to treat you in a harmful way, then they need to go. Sometimes it's our siblings. Sometimes it's a best friend that we grew up with. Sometimes it's our relationships we got ourselves into. And Lord knows when it comes to bad relationships, a lot of them have certainly happened around house parties. Because if we're partying around each other enough with the same group of friends and we get familiar enough, we just might fall in like with each other and we just might fall into bed with each other and then all of a sudden, what? You're what? Oh, I guess we need to get married now, huh? So I'm pretty sure a lot of bad relationships started with an unexpected pregnancy. And the whole got to do the right thing sometimes doesn't work out so right. Because everybody's bringing their baggage. And nobody knows how to do it right. So I want to thank you guys. I appreciate your time. I am definitely open to all the questions you have. Again, I want to thank Alex for letting me come in here to do this. This has been one of my babies. You know, I'm trying to get this stuff started. I want to make a difference. I've worked with so many men who have worked in manly fields, industrial fields, whether it's construction, oil fields, you name it, military, you know.
I was going to be a substance abuse counselor, and then I saw how much money they made.
They don't make much.
No.
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 So, again, thank you for having me here. I appreciate you guys becoming a sponsor of the organization through this process as well.
How would I get a copy of some of this?
I've sent a copy of the PowerPoint to Alex. We can certainly share it.
I'd like it.
Definitely can share it.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on there, you know.
Thank you. I don't think I'm trying to recreate the wheel. I'm just trying to explain the damn wheel.
You did a damn good job.
Thank you.